Hello and welcome. Today's video will be about the disassembly, diagnosis, and repair of the Shadow Blast Track. I believe this toy came out on the second wave of this particular toy line, since I can't recall it being in the cartoon. This toy has multiple issues. The cockpit blast shield seems to deploy rather quickly, and the cannon turret elevator isn't functioning either. Other than those two mechanical issues that I can see, the toy seems to be in fairly good condition. There's another knob down here. I don't really know what it's for. And there seems to be a compartment too at the front end of the toy. Maybe another cannon or some sort of electrical thing. I don't know what this knob is either. Oh, you know what? Okay. That's the little latch that holds the arms down. So what does this do? Oh. Okay. Well, it seems to get stuck. It's stuck in there though. Well, yep. Maybe there's a spring missing or something. Well, we'll just have to figure that out. Let's get to taking the toy apart and helping it along as best we can. Let's begin by removing the 6 screws that are underneath. There may be more under these tracks, but let's begin with those and work our way outwards. I can see more screws underneath the tracks towards the rear of the toy. So pulling off the tracks, okay, yeah, you can pull them off and you can see the screws underneath. I'm gonna get those too. After removing the 4 screws from the rear, it looks like the back part of the toy comes apart with the rear turret. Nice. So let's focus on the front. And it looks like I have to pry open a little bit the sides of the toy to let loose the inside. And looking at this little cannon, yeah, there's no spring to it. I don't think they would have designed it to just stay in there. Maybe if we put a spring on it somehow, it'll deploy a little bit better. Focusing on the front, looks like we're gonna have some fun here. This, you know what? This resembles the Harv 7 toy. The arms that pick up the load and put it on the bed. Wow. It looks similar, except I can see there is a spring that assists with the arms moving forward, bringing up that cover to the cockpit. Let's take a look at it in more detail. After removing the 3 screws that hold this assembly in place, we should be able to bring it out of the toy. Well, I can see the gearbox and motor. I can also see there's a spring there for the assist. Seems like it holds a lot of tension, that spring that's on the outside axle that's attached to these arms. I'm going to remove these 3 screws that hold the assembly, and we'll get a better look at what we're dealing with. I feel like as if it's not interacting at all with the motor. I wonder, motor looks, well, we'll look at the motor later. Oh, I can see. Okay. Wow. The there are 2 gears, large gears in parallel within the assembly. The gear that's attached to the axle is cracked. Okay. Wow. Well, let's see if we can work a miracle here to get that fixed. I'm going to see if I can try gluing this gear while it's still inside or mounted onto this axle. I don't want to try prying those arms apart for fear of breaking them. And if I can't be successful, then I'm just going to have to try and pry those arms apart. Looking at the motor isn't working well either. So that's 2 things. This is broken too. The driver gear outside seems to be mounted well. I don't think there's any trouble with that. It's probably the inside of the gearbox, that S-spring, is no longer functional. Let's try and focus our efforts here on fixing this gear that's mounted on this axle. I think I bit off more than I could chew with this toy. Okay, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try to put a bead of glue to flow down the crack of this gear and the hopes that it'll bind together. Uh, I don't know. I don't have very much high hopes for this uh, procedure, I guess. But I'm going to try because the risk of breaking the arms trying to separate them from the axle is going to be a tedious one. So I'd hate to break the toy just because of this gear. But I'm going to give it a try. Okay. I think this is not going to work. All I'm succeeding is doing is making a mess. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove these arms to this cockpit shield and attempt to separate them from this axle. Hopefully, with any luck, it won't break apart the arms and I'll be able to access the gear. Oh, thank God. Okay, so now I'm going to be able to fix this gear properly. I'm going to clean off the axle from any excess glue. And let's start um, fixing this gear properly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and glue the gear and let it sit for a while I figure out how to make it a little stronger. Because it seems that, those arms put a lot of uh, torque or tension onto this gear. And I'm going to need to figure out there's two sides, of course, the side with the lip, and then there's a side that's flat. So the side with the lip on this gear is where the other gear slides across its face and interacts with it. So I'm thinking on the other side where it's kind of flat and there's a little bit of a hump to it, um, I'm going to put something on the other side of it kind of to give it a little bit more strength. And I'll just glue that on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this recycled main gear that I had pulled out of a previous gearbox, and I'm going to modify the hole so it fits over that little hump that's on the flat side of this gear, and then glue it on there. So hopefully it'll give it more stability and a little bit more strength and hold it together at the same time while it's interacting inside the assembly with the other gear and the motor that's in parallel with it. Okay, it's coming along nicely. I think I'm gonna need to make the hole much bigger so it fits well over that lip and fits flat against the gear. I'm thinking now I'm just gonna have to cut from the holes. See that little main gear has holes, so I cut from one hole to the other, and that way I make the hole bigger without having to, you know, uh, drill or anything. So I'm just going to do that instead. Okay, it looks like I'm almost there. Using the other side of this assembly, I'm using it like a model to give me an idea of how big the hole needs to be that I have to put in this gear, this little main gear. So I figure because that model's the same side that it's on, but it's just a little bit of a hump on the other side of the panel that holds it. So I'm using that as a model. That way, when I put it on there, it'll just rotate around it. Since there's not much space in between this side of the gear that I'm going to be mounting it on and the side of the panel of the assembly that holds it there. So I'm using that as a model. And hopefully, after I glue it on there, it'll be okay. And it won't create friction, uh, you know, any more friction than what this gear needs because it's very fragile as it is in the state that it's in. So hopefully this will work. Now I'm going to put a liberal bead of glue around the whole side of this gear and then slap that little main gear that I just modified onto it. And the hopes that it'll just stay on there and provide the uh, the rigidness and the support this gear needs to operate correctly. So we'll go ahead and put that gear aside and let it dry. And we'll start working on the motor, rebuilding the motor, removing the old S-spring gear and replacing it with a new one. Okay, looking at this gearbox, it seems to be just a smidge larger than the gearboxes I usually pull out of these toys. There's also this little spacer in the back. I guess it provides stability when it's inside the assembly. I'm going to take it apart and let's see what we're dealing with. Okay, looking at this gearbox, it resembles the new gearboxes that I get from the wind-up toys. It has thick gears, and it looks like it has that new ratcheting S-spring with main gear to it. Wow, very, very interesting. I wonder why it's not working. I suppose I could swap this gearbox with a brand new one, but I believe I would have to flip the axle. No, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have to flip the axle. I could just straight out replace it. But in the efforts of keeping the toy original, I think I'll just try and replace this S-spring gear and see what's up. Okay, so the S-spring gear on this particular gearbox has a crack in it. It's no longer grabbing the axle anymore. So definitely I'll have to replace it. So just like on the Harv 7, when I had to rebuild one gearbox out of all of those Harv 7s that I repaired, only one of them I had to do in reverse because the S-spring gear and the driver gear were intact, and I wanted to keep them because they were working correctly. So I wasn't able to show you the real reverse um, assembly of that gearbox. So with this one, I will, since the driver gear and I guess the slipping gear that it has on it works fine and it's mounted great. So I don't want to cut that off. So I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this gearbox in reverse. And that way you can see it for yourselves instead of on the last video with the Harv 7, I only showed you an example of how to do that. So this time I'll be able to show you. What I'm doing here now is I'm using the housing divider to better orient the way I mount the spring onto this main axle because we're keeping it. So I have to make sure I mount the spring correctly in the right direction since I'm doing it in reverse. And, and when I have that figured out, I'll go ahead and I'll get myself a donor S-spring gear with main gear from one of these toys, from one of these housings, and I'm gonna go ahead and use another one of them toys that hop, since I'm only extracting the S-spring gear and main gear from it. Here I'm noticing that the springs, I mean the gears from these new gearboxes are pretty much the same thickness as the gears uh, in the original gearbox of this toy. So it looks like for this toy they had moved on to a better gearbox with thicker gears. But, you know, as always, you know, over time the plastic degrades and it becomes brittle and it cracks, and it's just a side effect of having these plastic gears in these gearboxes. So now that I've hammered out the new donor S-spring gear, I'm going to go ahead and mount it. And, ooh, okay. I'm not having any trouble mounting it. It seems like the the axle to this gearbox is the same, if not smaller, than this new gearbox that I took it out of. Interesting. Well, I hope it works. I hope it's enough friction there, or else I'll have to think outside of the box and tackle that problem too. But for right now, let's go ahead and assemble it. Hopefully, it's enough friction for the S-spring gear to hold on to that main axle, and it'll wind up just fine. Let's cross our fingers. So, to recap, to assemble the motor in reverse, you place the axle with the intact driver gear into the housing spring assembly. Uh, and then after that, you place the housing divide. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You place the spring in the correct orientation. Then you put the housing divider on top of it. And then you attach the new S spring gear onto the axle and slide it down on top of the housing divider, making sure it interacts uh, with the spring in between uh, both lips or protrusions that are on the S spring gear. And then you put it aside, and then you put in your gears onto the lower or the other half of the housing, and then you mount them together. You kind of sandwich them together in there. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and try and wind up this gearbox, and hopefully it'll wind up all the way, and we can call it a day for this gearbox. Okay, well, it's not it's not enough tension. I'm gonna have to think outside of the box to get some tension onto this S-spring gear so I can fully wind it up and it can operate normally. It seems like the proportions of this gearbox is similar to the new ones that I pull out of the wind-up toys. So that's a good thing in a way. But as I've seen, as soon as I hammer out the new S-spring from the axle that it's in, when I originally extract the S-spring gear and main gear from them, that they kind of just slide out. So they make a special area so you can mount the S-spring gear onto that axle with these new gearboxes. So I'm going to have to try something new here to create tension in the S-spring gear so it can wrap around that axle. I'm going to think about it for a little bit. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I went ahead and I raided my wife's sewing kit, and I got myself some thread. And what I'm gonna attempt to do is I'm gonna make up the space that's in between the S-spring gear and the axle. I'm gonna make up the space that it's not grabbing with some thread. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take two loops of thread and push it through the, I guess, the eye or the hole of the S-spring gear, and wrap it around one of the ears uh, on the other side of the S-spring gear, and then mount it. And hopefully that'll give me the tension that I need so it'll grab onto the axle. And I'm thinking also that since this is thread, and if it's not enough tension, the thread will slide, you know, since it's going to be vertical, it'll start sliding uh, horizontally inside uh, the in between the axle and the gear. So it'll create even more tension if it slides a little bit. At least that's my thinking. So hopefully this will work. And I can already see I put it on there, and there's already tension. There is a lot of tension already. So this is working. My wife gave me the idea, so I'm going to try this out. Okay, so I've pressure fitted the S-spring gear onto the spring, making sure that both ears fit in between the spring. And I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and just cut off um, the excess cord here, thread, the excess thread, and there, it's nice and tidy. Wow, I'm probably going to have to save this string for the motor on the Canon for the rear. Maybe it has the same gearbox, I don't know yet, but more than likely it does. And wow, okay, let's finish putting this bad boy together. Okay, we have a working gearbox. I'm starting to feel a little bit more optimistic about this refurbishing of this toy. Wow. I was feeling a little sad about the broken gear here, but I'm starting to have high hopes as to uh, the fixing of this toy. This is good. Okay, now the glue has hardened pretty well, and I'm gonna go ahead and start sliding this gear back into place onto its axle, and it feels like it's holding okay. I'm gonna go ahead and put the other gear that goes in parallel to it. This is the make or break portion of this video. It's looking good. Okay, so I'm gonna, yep, nice, very nice. Okay, I'm happy with this. Very, very good. Well, everything was going super groovy until right now. It looks like there's not enough tension in the arms to do a full cycle. I wonder what's wrong. Before I remove the inside of the toy, I want to get a better look at this Canon mount. And I want to see, take a better look as to where I can, or where a spring would be, if there was one ever in there. So I can get this little compartment to work when I pull on the switch. So, okay. Oh, look at that, the spring isn't even grabbing. Okay, so. Okay then, I gotta put the spring over here. Put this over here. Yeah. Is that better? Let's see, that'll work. Okay, then that's what it was. Okay, spring. Okay, so there's got to be something here. That's weird. How can this not have anything here? So, as I've mentioned before, the setup for these arms to bring up the blast shield for the cockpit to this toy resembles a lot like the Harv 7, except for on the Harv 7, each arm has its own spring to push it along as it's lifting a load. In this instance, for this particular toy, it only has one beefy string that's wrapped around the axle that assists in bringing up the cockpit shield. What I'm doing now is I'm trying to find, I got this little spring, and it's like a leaf spring, and I want to install it in the toy in such a way that it assists with that deployment of that chin cannon, I guess you could call it, that's underneath the toy there, because when I pull on the switch, it doesn't come out, and gravity isn't enough to make it come out. So I figure I'll put a spring there. But where I'm mounting it, it's nearby, ironically, the gear I just fixed. So I got to be careful that um, when I'm mounting it, it doesn't interact with that gear, or else I'll end up breaking it by accident. So I got to be careful. Okay, this part of the toy is in good order. Let's start working on that elevating turret. It looks like there's two screws holding that turret in place, so I'm going to take those out and slide the turret out. There's also two screws holding the assembly together, I'm going to take those out and let's see what we're dealing with. Okay. Oh, it's a rack and pinion. Nice. I was picturing something totally different, but hey, rack and pinion seems like the best way to go for this thing. Nice. And the motor looks like the same motor that is used at the front end of the vehicle. Nice. It has the same spacer in the back, and it looks like the driver gear and that slipping gear that's with it are mounted well. Oh boy, it looks like I'm gonna have to reverse build this one too, but I'll take it out to make sure that it's working. Yeah, everything's working except the S-spring gear inside the gearbox. So I'm gonna have to open it up and replace it. Okay, so just like I did for the motor at the front of the vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and use thread. Uh, Take 2 loops of thread, push it through the eye of the S-spring gear, and loop it to one of the ears. Because the axle is ironically thinner than the regular ones I pull out of these toys. Okay, so now that we have a working gearbox, we can begin assembly of the rack and pinion for this elevating turret. If I can remember for some reason how this gearbox goes in there, um, hmm, well, This is embarrassing. I guess I'll just put in the rack, and from there I can figure out how the motor goes in. Okay, well that's nice. It looks like the rack only fits in one particular way, so that's great for us trying to rebuild these toys. That's a big plus. I wonder if they designed it that way. Hmm. So, as always with these rack and pinion, I like to give the gearbox a couple of turns before I put the rack back on it. And it seemed to be working well. That way, putting a couple of turns onto the motor, uh, this rack and pinion assembly will do a full cycle, and when it reaches the top, it'll be somewhat firm. So placing it back into the cylinder, deep on the top side of the cylinder, inside there are two pegs that the two holes at the top of the platform there from the rack and pinion, they kind of fit into. And I kind of like to put the rack and pinion on the side of the notch that's on the outside of this cylinder or drum or turret elevator. And there's also a notch where the rack and pinion fits into this bottom cap that I'm screwing into place now. That way the latch, there's a little protrusion out there for the latch. That way the latch, if you put it on the same side where the um, rack is, then it won't be cockeyed if I'm explaining myself correctly. If it's put away from that notch, then the drum will sit kind of cockeyed. But if you put it next to it, then it'll sit up straight when it's in its deployment stage, sitting inside the vehicle. And I forgot the spacer. That little spacer goes on the other side of the motor, and I forgot to put it in there. Oops. But this is a good opportunity to show you those pegs at the bottom or top end of that cylinder. And this is where that spacer goes. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, now I've hindered the motor. Now I gotta separate the spacer from the motor. Great. Just great. I'll use my X-Acto knife to form a little space. There we go. Okay, now we got it. Okay, so at the bottom end of this turret elevator, there are two notches. I don't know if you can see them. And there's only one way you could put it in there. You can't put it in upside down because it's not going to work. See, there's the two holes in the two knobs at the bottom. Okay. And then make sure that little notch stays on the side of the rack. Okay. Now let's close it up, making sure the plate, the slot in the plate has the rest of the rack sitting in it. Okay, let's assemble the rest of this toy. God, I'm excited. This was a pretty long rebuild or refurbishment. I'm excited to see the whole thing work now. So if I'm not mistaken, when this blast shield comes over the cockpit area and encases the tank, uh, it's supposed to activate the turret at the same time, and it's not doing that. It kind of gets stuck on these tracks before it builds up momentum to hit that little switch there at the back. I'm gonna have to figure that out. But other than that, I consider this a success. It's a successful refurbishment. God, I'm really happy with it. This is great. Despite that, I got the toy for dirt cheap, which is nice. Now I know why. But yeah, it works for me. Thanks a lot for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope this rebuild or this refurbishment of this toy will help you
and fixing the problems that you might have with yours. Hopefully they are similar in the aspect of the motors, but for that little gear that's in parallel from the assembly of the forward end of this toy, I hope that is not the case for you. I don't wish that one on anybody. But again, thank you, and I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you again on the next one.